what happens. Okay, we'll see how much memory my phone has too. All right. Okay, so this, you guys ready to take some notes? Maybe. It's okay. You don't have to take notes. Okay, so here, okay, first of all, on a scale from like 1 to 10, 10 being a lot, like 0 being none, how much do you know about other world religions?
On a scale of 1 to 10?
Yes.
2.
Okay, so 2 would be not very much, right?
Not very much.
What about you? How much do you know about other world religions, do you feel like?
Other world religions?
Yes.
Well, I don't know what you mean by no, but anyways, I
Like,
probably a 4.
Okay, so you like aware of what they are and general stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I'm not
It's
saying to be
I've never even heard of. But
I am definitely not proclaiming to be an expert on world religions, but it is helpful to have a context, especially when we start talking about global missions. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on world religions, but we are going to spend a little bit of time. Okay, so there's 2 ways of thinking about world religions that you hear a lot publicly. Okay, so and I'm going to depict them with mountains, kind of. They're, like, you can imagine these as mountains. Okay, so one of them you've probably heard before. Let's just say we got Hinduism. I'm going to just throw out some of the big ones. Buddhism, which I can never spell right. We got, Islam, Christianity, all the others, okay? Okay, and they all, and people will say that all of these are just different ways to practice things, but ultimately they all lead to the same place. They lead to God, salvation, nirvana, whatever it is that is good. Okay, so have you heard this idea before? All religions are the same, essentially.
yeah, I've heard that. I don't believe that at all.
She doesn't believe it at all, but that is a very common belief that all of them lead to the same thing. So this is what I view as the story, the narrative that we see in the Bible is a little bit different than this. But it's kind of hard to like counteract this in a conversation unless you're prepared, because most of the time you're like, well, I can see, if you actually start having a conversation with somebody about it and they'll start pointing out the similarities, they'll be like, yeah, I can actually see your point, unless you have a different way of approaching it. So this is the other way of approaching it. We all had a relationship with God in the beginning, which we see in Genesis. And we have this relationship with God, this intimacy, this goodness. And in this goodness, what ends up happening is we fall away from people. There was the fall right here. Well, actually, I guess it has to be higher up because that means, but there's the fall. And people try their own way to get back to God. And so the ways that they try to get to God are through things like Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. I'm just using these ones because these ones are the biggest ones. Christianity. All right? So in this case, we're flipping this mountain, like people have this mountain. Actually, they usually draw it the other way. They usually draw it and say, like, it'll be like exactly like this. And they'll be like, all these things get to God. All these things, and the arrows are pointing towards God. But in reality, what we see in the biblical narrative is that there's a relationship with God and that people fell away. And when they fell away, they started their own different ways to try to get back to God. So there's a very important story, which we find, I don't even know where it is. It's somewhere in Genesis. But, hi. The story of Babel, which is interesting because Babel later became Babylon, and then you see Babylon as this metaphor well, sometimes it wasn't a metaphor, but all throughout the Bible tell revelations of people who are not following God, right? So in the story of Babel, you have a bunch of people who are trying this pathway to get back into a relationship with God. Actually, nope, they're not trying to get back into a relationship with God. They're trying to reach goodness and awesomeness on their own, which a lot of times you could say that people, when they're trying to get back to what is good, they think they're the own source. They are God, or they are the source of good. So this is one very, very predominant worldview, is that if we build and we work together, I really like this idea, but the idea of better together, because I do think we're better together. I just don't think that is going to get us to salvation. But the idea of better together, like if we work together, then we're going to make it to goodness. We're going to be like God ourselves, right? And God was like, whoa, 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 whoa. This isn't going to work. And so in this moment, here is the introduction of every, so God wipes this out, not like in a mean way, actually, which I appreciate. I guess because I tend to have some tension with the way that God did things, but I'm processing through those because I am a human and I do not think like him. But in this case, he gave people different languages. So we have all the different languages, and then we have this, that talks like about the splitting of land in the world. In this passage, I'll send it to you later. It's in Genesis. Okay, so this is my world. It's not a very good-looking world. But in this passage, what it says is that all these languages got split up, the people scattered, and then the earth divided. So now we have languages, and now we have division. What do we call different languages in division now? Ultimately, they're just different nations. Nations, different people groups. And it's kind of fascinating how many there are. And they all have, and pretty much every time there's a different group of people that connect with language, they create their own system to survive, which is, their political system, whether they're an official group on the globe or not, but or whatever. They have a political system, they have a cultural type. They make up their own cultural and like their norms and their values. They have values, they have different ways of believing things, they have their own religion, which can be defined sometimes, but sometimes it isn't defined. But essentially, each people group, when you have a new language, this is what happens. But even though God was the one who instigated this, because he knew that this wasn't going to this wasn't going to work to get them back to goodness and God, this is such a huge theme in the Bible. Like when you really start studying it, how much he talks about different peoples and nations, and how like his passion for bringing them, like, so here they're all like, so they're all together, like right up here, they're all together, and then they get separated. So people are together, then they get separated, and then, and then we're going to have all these different people groups all throughout the globe, and then through Jesus, this is the biggest deal, then Jesus brings them back together into a new nation, brings them together to make his own nation and his own people that have a relationship with him. And so so this is really cool to me, because you see this pattern, like they're together, they're separated, and then like through the end, you get them back together. So this week I've been reading, where's my Bible is being used. Does anybody else have the Bible app on their phone?
No, but I could look it up.
I do.
You do? Can I borrow it for a minute? Or maybe like 5 minutes, a little bit longer. So like missionologists spend a lot of time trying to connect with people, different nations, by giving them the word of God in their own language. So there's a lot about Bible translation, and there's a lot reaching different people groups. And sometimes we think of different people groups as like like in the United States, we think all United States people, all Americans, like we view all of Americans as like the same type of people group, but Americans are not actually all the same people group. Like in America, we have like the dominant culture, which is generally like white, and those who have assimilated into white culture, and they're rather humanistic is their religion, with a little bit of mixing of Christianity. So that would be I know we've talked about this before, but in the United States we also have other specific people groups like the Amish, the German Amish. They're like their very own people group. We also have different First Nations or Native Americans, depending on what you call them, or indigenous people. They are their own people group. We also have Hawaiians, like Native Hawaiians, not like, I spelled Hawaiians, but like the people group of Hawaiians, not actually like people who just live in Hawaii, but there's like a group of people who are Hawaiian, and then we also have German, Irish. We also have a lot of just, different people groups that are like from other people groups, like you have Mexican culture in your family, right? And, and other, like you talk with people who are Puerto Rican, and then you have so we have all these different types of cultural types. Black has ended up becoming its own cultural type that is very different than African, but there's a lot of, because after 200 years, you end up having your own cultural type. So this one I ran across the other day, and I thought this was so interesting. So I was talking about Bible translation. So you guys are familiar with the Lord's Prayer, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's see. The Lord's Prayer is in Matthew 6. What verse is it? I'm trying to remember. Matthew 6. Well, you got very big print on here.
It's nice and big.
Yeah, it's nice and big. I can see why. Don't worry about tomorrow. Is it not in Matthew 6, or is that the beginning of Matthew 6? Yes, here it is. Okay, Matthew 6, verse 9. Okay, so I'm going to have this read it to you in a different language, which you will probably understand some of, because this language is, let's see, let me find it.
It's at the top if you're trying to figure out how to do it.
No, I found it. I'm just trying to find the language. Let's see. I can look it up. That will help. This is called Hawaiian Pidgin.
Oh, I've heard Hawaiian Pidgin. My brother-in-law tries to speak it.
He tries to speak it?
Yes.
Why?
Because he loves it.
He just likes it.
He even bought a Bible over there.
Oh,
Hawaii. Yes.
Interesting. Okay, yes. Well, I have never actually heard of Hawaiian Pidgin, and here you are already knowing it. Why did it not show it to me in the Bible? Come on, go back to it.
My phone is not updated.
No,
so.
I did this yesterday too, and I was like, I clicked on it, and then it didn't automatically go to it, and then I was like, come on, go to it. No, we just had it. I just had it open, and then it went away again. Hawaiian. Okay. All right. So that's the language we have. Let's see if it works.
You have to wait. My phone is really slow in here.
I'm like, I don't know how to move it from I click on it, and then it's like, okay, it's here, and then so it says that this is what language it is, and then okay, there we go. Okay, so I'm gonna read to you. I'm gonna have it read to you because I'm gonna pronounce it wrong.
You want it to read? You want it to read?
Yeah, I think there's a thing that makes
it's
it read.
on the top.
Yeah. Okay. So
right here.
It's interesting to listen to. So but then it'll start it. There we go.
No, it won't use.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna have it read. I'm gonna have it read to us, and what I would like us to do while it's reading, because you'll understand some of it. It's interesting because it sounds almost like unintelligent, because we always have heard these words in movies where it's kind of like.
That's why he likes it.
Yeah, where people are, and a lot of it. But it's interesting because 200 years ago, when Hawaii was being colonized and there was all these big plantations, they would take internationals from around the world and they couldn't communicate. And so on the plantations, they essentially made their own language. And now it's like an official language. Like it's a very smart language. It's not unintelligent at all. It has like all the markers of language, and like you can go to school, you can learn it, but it just, because of the way that we hear these words, we're like, that kind of sounds like, God is the big kahuna, and like stuff like that. But if you are from that people group, this is like God's word to you, and it's real. And so I just want you.
That's probably why they made the Bible. I mean, they
did.
Yeah.
They did. So it just, for the next few minutes, we're going to listen to part of Matthew 6 and just try to think about the fact that God is reaching people all around the world, and I just worship him in that way, if that makes any sense. Okay, so let me go back to verse 6 and see if I can get it to start at the one that I wanted to. I don't know if I probably can, but I might as well try, right? Okay.
Matthew chapter 6. Watch out. No good you make tantaran in front of peoples when you do the religious kind ceremonies. Because you guys only like people see the religious kind ceremonies that you guys do. If you guys make like that, your Father in the sky not going to give you guys nothing. When you guys give money to the guys that don't want nothing, no make a big show. Tell other guys that tell one thing and do another when they go inside the Jew churches and when they walk in the town where the people stay. They like the people tell that they're awesome. That's right. And I tell you guys this too. They will get all the pay already. So you guys, when you give money to the guys that don't want nothing, don't tell nobody. Then nobody gonna know that you give money. But your Father, he can see what the other guys no can see. And he gonna give you plenty for that. When you guys pray, don't make just like the guys that tell one thing and do another. They like stand up and pray inside the Jew churches or outside where everybody go. Because they like the people see what they do. That's right. And I say tell you this too. They get all their pay already. But you guys, when you pray, go inside your room and close the door. Then pray to your Father. He stay inside the room with you, where the other guys no can see. And he gonna give you plenty for that. Because your Father can see what the other guys no can see. When you guys pray, don't tell any kind of stuff that don't mean nothing. Get other peoples all over the world that make like that. They think God gonna listen to them because they tell joke plenty stuff when they pray. No make just like them, because your Father know already all the stuff you need before you ask him for do something. So pray like this. God, you our Father, you stay inside the sky. We like all the people know for sure how good and special you stay and show you plenty respect. We like you come the king for everybody. We like everybody make how you like. Over here inside the world, just like everybody up there inside the sky, make how you like. Try give us the food we need for every day. Let us go and hammer our shame for all the bad kind of stuff we do to you. Just like we let the other guy go, and we don't stay hoo-hoo with them for the bad kind of stuff they do to us. Show us, guys, how for not do bad kind of stuff. When somebody give us chance for do them, but get us out of trouble from the bad guy. Because you are a king. You get the real power, and you stay awesome forever. That's it. I still tell you guys, if you let them...
I love that part. It says, for you, the real king, and you stay awesome. You stay inside the sky. You stay awesome forever.
Yeah, I hear that Bible a lot with him.
That's so interesting. It's so funny that I'm like, oh, this is something that nobody else
bought one when he was over there.
That was amazing. It is kind of cool. I don't know. It's not like I know. I took a picture with it because my phone is busy. But I know that like it's not like a language that I know, but it's similar. There's enough English in it that you can kind of understand it.
Yeah.
So in the past 2 days, I've been reading the Bible just in that, and it's so interesting because it's like making me, think about the words of God in a different way, and I don't know. I just found that interesting. So any other? What are your thoughts, Val? Before I move on,
In regards to,
anything we've talked about.
well, I could follow him
Yeah.
easily.
Yeah.
I mean, it's English. It's just,
There's a lot of English.
It's spoken in Hawaiian.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just expressed differently, but yeah. What else?
Do you have any questions or thoughts about this before I erase it and move on? I guess I don't have to erase it right away.
I mean, I think like the mountain thing, I think it's a good way to look at it, but I don't know. I've never thought of it that way, so that's a new way to think of it. Like, I don't know if I see that, I don't know. I don't know. Let me think.
That's okay. You're allowed to think.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I see that all religions desire good.
Yeah.
And yet I see them, they all desire good, but I feel like they differ so greatly.
Yeah.
And differ greatly in what that good is.
Yeah.
I think is what I feel is like, I don't know if I'm getting this correctly.
That makes sense.
So
yeah, I mean it is interesting because like I think that for a while when I was like I was a young adult and I studied cultural anthropology in college, which is very relativistic, which means there's not they don't believe in like absolute truth. They're very much like, well, in this culture, we value like, and they would point to like how all these cultures had very similar values and different religions had different very similar values, but they played them out differently. Here we have traffic laws to protect us from hurting one another, and that's the way that we value like our other human beings, whereas like in this culture they would value them this way, but they still have the same shared value, and so like it was interesting to be in that environment, and it really challenged me to be like, okay, well, why do I follow God? Like I don't want to follow God just because my parents followed God. Like, is there really something different about following Jesus that these other world religions don't have? And so I studied it in depth, and I, because that was where I was at in life. And it was interesting because, like, ultimately, the one thing that I found that was common with every single religion is that they're moving towards something. All of them are moving towards something. And it is, you're right, maybe it's not exactly the same, it might not be the same version of goodness, but there is some, like in Romans, 1 talks about this. There's some idea that God has put in humanity of what is good and what is right. And pretty much everybody across the board does have this value of something we want this.
I feel like there is that void in us that searches for that good.
I definitely
believe that in every religion, and that's definitely true and easy to see and understand.
And then like maybe they don't all want like, okay, so like let's talk about a few of them. So like humanism, which is essentially like humanism is what people in the United States called like I'm a none, I'm a no religion. It's very enforced by humanism. It's a set of worldviews that's very much like I can find the answer to life inside of myself. So they're still headed towards goodness, but their version of goodness is it must be in me. It must be in me. I am essentially kind of God in a way. Whereas in like Islam, their goal is to get to God and a version of heaven, which might look a little bit different than our version of heaven. Like our version of heaven is a resurrection and on a new earth. But their hope is that they become, that they follow enough rules. They follow rules to get to, God in heaven, which is very similar to, like legalistic Christianity that doesn't exactly That's okay. And, you know, like the legalistic version of Christianity where it's kind of like, we're saved by grace, but not actually. You know, they're doing the exact same thing as Islam. They're following rules and hope to get to God and heaven. So Islam's version of heaven is a little bit different than ours, but it's kind of similar. So legalistic Christianity does kind of the same thing. Then you have like most of the Eastern religions, they head towards, their goal is to reach, usually there's an element of reincarnation, because you realize you're not going to become good enough the first time, so you need as many lifetimes as possible to do it. So you keep resurrecting, and hopefully you'll go up the totem chain, and eventually he's like, eventually, if you keep, you live a good life, and they believe in one of them is dharma and the other one is karma, but it's kind of like you get back, you get back what
You put into it.
What you put into it. But ultimately, again, it's trying to do good so that you get to...
What is that last one labeled?
Karma?
No, but what religion?
Oh, so this would be most Eastern religions.
Oh, Eastern religion.
And they're not all the same. Like Hinduism is a little bit different than Buddhism. I'm not as familiar with the Eastern religions. I'm just kind of like, these are kind of similar in the sense. Taoism is another one. Confucianism gets put into it, but Confucianism is more of like it's still a worldview, but it's not as much of a religion, but it's still like a way of living, but it's kind of more political. So like a lot of people in China follow Confucianism, but it's like the way of Confucius, but it's really like doing different good things. That's more like a lifestyle, but they don't consider it a religion. So on top of it, you might also follow Buddha, in which case you might, and what's confusing about Buddhism is that like some Buddhists have like a whole bunch of different gods, but ultimately you still have Buddha as the main god, but in reality he's also just a teacher that you follow. So, which is kind of also because Hinduism is the same way. You have a whole, like everything is a god, from yourself, as a person to the plant over there and the, lion over there and the cow over there, and some of them are just better than the others. But then there's a couple that are really big deals. There's like 3 really big ones. So these kind of, interestingly, get really mixed up in most, like China, they would actually consider themselves not, like in China, you're technically not supposed to follow a religion because they're a secular nation, because they are communist, which is not exactly a religion. It's kind of like humanism. It's more of a worldview, but worldviews are also kind of like religions. They have the same element as religions, but they're not classified as religions. In China, and also a lot of Russia is like this also. But what ends up happening is that kind of like the state ends up being God, and then you live by these Confucius ideas, but because most of the people were Buddhist before communism took over, a lot of the beliefs are still Buddhist. And then there's also a lot of interesting like ancestor worship and spiritualism, and like especially when it comes to superstitions that are intertwined in it. So when we went to China, it was interesting because everybody's like, I don't have a religion, but in reality they all are very practicing of types of like religions within it. It's just like from the outward perspective, they're not supposed to. Mm. So like if you're looking at us in this room right here, there's 3 of us, right? Mm-hmm. So I would represent, essentially Christianity would be like considered 1/3 of the world. So it'd be like one of us. Now I think it might be, it's kind of between 1/3 and 1/4. But by Christianity, again, you're like, okay, what type of Christianity? Are we talking about like cultural Christianity? Are we talking about legalist Christianity? Like, are we talking about like nominally Orthodox or Catholic, which are also often mixed with like tribal religions, or like Orthodox Orthodox Christianity in some places might be very legit, but in like Russia, it's very much like communism mixed with a little bit of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
So you have, so when you say those people are Christians, it doesn't really mean that they're
Followers.
They're Christians. So, which makes it a little bit more confusing. But so you have these things, and in case here you have but the end result, this is the end result over here. End result. The end result is you want something good in the end. So right here you have reincarnation, and the goal of reincarnation is so that way you have more lives to become better and better and better, because obviously you're not in this life, so maybe in the next life you will be, and maybe the next one you'll be a man instead of a woman, and maybe, but if you're bad, then karma will hit you, or maybe it's dharma, I forget which one's which, and then you will become a fly, and you don't want to become a fly, but at least your lifespan is short, and then you'll be reincarnated again, so it's very interesting, I don't think I would like that at all. I don't like the idea of having to live again a whole nother life to try to prove to become good enough. So ultimately, if once you become good enough, and then that's usually like when you start becoming a priest, or someday you'll enter into a nirvana, which isn't exactly. I'm trying to remember. Nirvana is one of them. I don't remember which one.
I never even heard of Nirvana.
Besides the band. Well, this is a good thing for you to know. So, essentially, and some of them call it Nirvana, some of them don't call it that, but essentially it's because you become one with the universe.
Is that what it means, literally?
I think so, but I'm not totally sure. I can look it up.
Look it up.
I
always somehow thought Nirvana, paradise, or something like that.
It's essentially like a version of I'm one with creation and goodness. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, we believe in a specific creator that brings us, we have oneness with him, but he's still ultimately in charge. Hi, baby. So ultimately, there's some place all of them are trying to go. That's what I'm pointing out. And the only one that doesn't require it to be on you, because all of them are on be better, find, I'm good. So this one is very much like discovering, I'm actually internally good, and I'm actually can be better, version of myself. That would be what you see a lot in the United States. And then in the same thing with and there's other ones.
Watch his head.
Good catch. Oh, he's going towards you.
Nope.
You're come out first. So there's different other ones of them, paganism. Paganism, that would be that's when it's magic, but not that's not storytelling magic. That's more
sorcery.
Yeah, sorcery. It originates with a lot of Druidism. This is really a lot of this was the tribal religions of Europe. Before Christianity got moved into Europe, that was it was kind of the source. I mean, it's interesting because paganism isn't really much worse than any of these other things. I think because Christians have always kind of pushed back on it, because that's where this is probably where most white people's ancestors come from, and so it ends up being in a lot of our storytelling. But essentially, a paganism is Earth is good. I'm kind of a little bit I'm God, but I'm also, the plants are God. So it's kind of a mixture between a little bit of some Eastern worldviews of goodness plus tribal. It's, they're all
down at the bottom.
I'm I'm not even sure it's worth going into all the depth of all of them.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to point out in saying all of this is that when you have Christianity that's like how we view Christianity, the following of Jesus, this one is different because this one is all focused on grace. It's the only one of all of these that doesn't have to either earn our salvation, or it's the only one that doesn't require you to accept yourself as like naturally good and that you're amazing automatically. Which I think is like, seems very hard to me to lie to yourself that way. I'm always like, I don't even understand how you can believe that about yourself. But I think it's like, you know, it's like ultimately like a type of self-improvement that really sincerely believes that they are the source of all of their improvement, you know. But the rest of them are all about like following rules, doing more. All of them are about doing more. Grace, you know, Christianity that is ruled by grace is the only one that doesn't require that. And that is, you know, after my study of world religions, when I was a young adult, that's what I came away with was, I want the one that gives me grace because I know I'm not going to become good enough on my own, and I know I'm not going to be able to follow all these rules to hopefully get into heaven.
Yeah, but see, I grew up that way, and it wasn't.
But it wasn't because it
No.
was probably more like this though, legalistic Christianity.
Yes, very much.
Yeah, so you
and
have
trying
a
to get
need,
out of that is very, very difficult.
which is confusing because you had like the cultural aspects of Christianity, but it was still ruled as or lived out not as, you know, the gospel of grace.
Okay, so there's a movie out right now that, and you've got to watch it. It was in the theaters, but it didn't last long, and I knew it wouldn't.
Which
but
one?
I
The
found
Jesus
it out.
Revolution?
No,
Or a different one?
no. I watched it last night, and you know I already forgot the name of it. But we watched it. No, we watched it last night, and you have to find it. It's on YouTube, but there's a certain group that's showing it. But it's about our church.
Oh, about like the Pentecostal church?
Yes.
Oh, that would be interesting.
Yeah. I mean,
Did you watch it, Val?
I haven't.
No.
I
Oh,
don't
okay.
know which one she's on.
I'll tell you because I was trying to find it last night. I read about it. Somebody had posted about it, so I think I shared it on Facebook to try to get people to watch it. So let me just double check if I did.
Yeah, you could easily put in here cults as another one.
Yes.
What about Orthodox Jews?
Yeah. Oh, I didn't even put Jews in here, did I? Jews, Jews function a lot like Islam does. They would probably hate me if they heard me say that. They have different rules.
Just different rules. Same idea.
Same
just
idea.
different
You
rules.
have one God. You have most of them believe in a type of resurrection, but not all of them because there's the Sadducees and the Pharisees. But in those cases, ultimately it's a very rule-based religion.
It's called Southern Gospel.
Oh, Southern Gospel.
Yeah.
Follow rules.
It's on Up Faith and Family, whatever is the name of the company that's trying to show it right now.
So Nirvana.
Oh, what does it
says,
actually mean?
Well, in this dictionary it says in Buddhism. So
Okay.
it's in parentheses. A transcendent state in which there is neither suffering, desire, nor sense of self.
Yeah, you become completely dissipated into the universe.
And the subject is released from the effects of karma and the cycle of death and rebirth.
I see why you want to get out of that.
It represents the final goal of Buddhism.
Yeah.
But that's like... I mean, this is my first time reading this. I always thought Nirvana was a state of total paradise or peace.
Oh.
So this is something
It's
totally different.
Yeah,
Like,
definitely.
Well,
there's no suffering nor desire nor sense of self.
yeah, you are just kind of you disappear, but it's like a good disappear. It's like what your goal is to like
To be nothing?
yeah, kind of. Well, if you're thinking you're reincarnating over and over again to like you want to get.
Well, I mean, it
Like,
doesn't say
it's like-
that. It says it represents the final goal of Buddhism. So that's not the final. I mean,
It's not final.
I mean-
like one with the universe.
no. Rebirth or incarnation
Yeah.
wouldn't be final.
No, those are the paths to get there.
Wow, you never would get there though if you're always reincarnated.
Yeah, but if you're hoping that you get there, maybe you do. Like I've like read a little bit. Like they're like, did Buddha get there? Well, we hope so.
Well, I mean, if it's a state of being, that would make more sense. But this says it's
You just
neither suffering, desire, nor sense of self.
yeah, you just kind of like disappear, but you don't disappear. It's not like all of a sudden you're dead. It's like you disappear into like the state of everything. You become part of everything. Like ultimately,
Okay, can I, because this might help me, if you guys can give me some feedback. I just read this last night, and now that we're talking about this is where I think she went. But my sister-in-law from my first age sister, she's the oldest of the 4 kids, and you know, I've stayed in contact with her. She's always been a sort of a, I don't know what kind of person, but I love her to pieces. And so I've been able to talk to her about God, and Dave, of course, has done the same thing, her brother. But this is what she posted last night. Well, I read it last night. She posted it. It says, 17 months ago today, my beautiful 17-year-old grandson died as a result of someone who we thought was his friend hurting him so badly. There was no justice for Christopher or our family. I truly believed that God would bring him back. I prayed constantly for 17 days that God would take me and spare my grandson. Never have I believed so desperately as I did in those days. No grandmother wants to outlive her children or grandchildren. I have outlived 3 of my precious grandchildren. I have no faith in a God anymore. So now she's turned her total back
on
towards
God.
God. I mean, she spreads it out right here.
no, she had a lot of faith to believe
Yeah.
that she would be replaced and resurrect her son.
No, she thought that she should die. She begged God to let her die instead of him. I have no faith in a God anymore. I know that there is a power greater than myself drawn from the universe. My life from the day I was brought into this world is nothing but heartache. Sexual, emotional, and physical abuse. My mother didn't want me and tried to abort me. She let me know throughout my life that she prayed for my death. 1 hour after her funeral, I read her written words only about me, and she confirmed what she had said to me throughout my life. So, you know.
Yeah.
It's so crazy because I loved her with all that I am. I have a hard time understanding why she didn't love me. I had to learn how to feel love. I don't take being loved by anyone easy, and I become more isolated in my world each day. You can't hurt me if I'm not near you. This I have learned since losing Christopher. The power to survive this world comes from within me. Most things that bothered me throughout my life don't matter anymore. I am learning to accept the isolation and the lack of being part of a family. I have learned that it is better for me to be alone most of the time. I work every day of my life to see the world in a different light. I draw from the universe my strength to continue on with this journey of life, to be a better me, to find my purpose. I live today for Christopher. Everything I do thinking of him. Christopher has helped me to see clearly, and I believe he is with me every day. I spent my life looking for acceptance from others when all along the only acceptance I needed was from me. The person who least loved me in this world was me. I am forever grateful for the things I have learned and overcome. I am strong and I am beautiful. For those who believe I will go to your hell, it's okay with me, as I've been there so many times. I have frequent flyer miles. My life has been in preparation for hell, and I am expecting to pay for my sins as a daughter and a mother. You live your truth, and I'll live mine. Don't have pity for me at all. That's not what I'm here for. Maybe I helped someone. Now
So,
I'm reading
who
this,
is
and
this person?
This is my sister-in-law.
Oh, you're like, wow.
Your ex's sister.
Yes. And she was just here a few months ago and had told me that she was going to be down to see me and Brooke and Caleb because she could, you know, she was going to be that close because she lives in Nebraska.
That's intense.
I reached out to her because she was up at Abe's, which is in Redlands.
Uh-huh.
So it's San Bernardino area. We were in whatever, Desert Springs. So coming home, I called to let her know we're coming by. She didn't respond. We got home. I said, I thought you were coming down to see us. She says, I will see you before I leave. Haven't heard from her since. And now I read this, and because I've been off Facebook for 40 days. So I went on yesterday, and I was like, oh, she has just totally turned her back on God.
Yeah.
And don't try to.
Yeah, she doesn't.
But I was there for
She
her
made
when
that
she
very clear.
Yeah. I was there for her. I talked to her quite a bit when Christopher and it was her grandson, her oldest grandson. He passed, and she just thought he shouldn't have went. And so I'm like, oh my goodness. But when you're talking about she's now, it's the universe.
Yeah, she's
one of those.
Yeah. I mean, well, which is interesting.
You reach them? I mean,
yeah, you can totally reach them. These people are reached all the time. Lots of times they call themselves agnostic. She would probably be in the category of agnostic, which means that you believe that there is something. So agnostic means that there's something, you just aren't sure what it is. But they kind of live in this lifestyle of like, well, there's something, there's a universe, and I know that sometimes I use the word
hell, she's just.
But what's interesting is that she's mixing in different other interesting philosophies in there. So if you notice, an atheist is the other one where you don't really believe in God at all. Atheist. Yeah. But she's on the agnostic side, which means I feel like I don't know, like I know atheists who like decided to believe in God too, and I'm like, how did that work for you? Like, how did you just like switch it on? Yeah. But then agnostics, I feel like they're not difficult for me to talk to because they're like, well, there's something there. I just don't know what it is. And usually there's like a lot of anger and bitterness at God, or like, you know.
She believed in God and thought
and now
that God should,
But she also had, like, if we went back to remember the over and under and those different postures of how we relate to God, like she believed in the from God posture, which is like, well, God is supposed to give me whatever I ask, and I'm supposed to be without suffering. And so if you have that posture towards God, when that doesn't happen, which it won't, you're going to get really, really, like your faith was based on the wrong thing. Your faith was based off of what
circumstances.
Yeah, circumstances and what you deserve. So in her case, I would say the best thing that you could do for her is just literally be there for her and listen to her. And then, I
don't know if I could.
Yeah.
Just reading that, I was like,
tense.
Oh gosh, what in the world happened?
I mean, you just have to like love people. Like when you're with them, you'd be like, God, help me to love them. And you could just be like, I disagree with you. Like when after they spend forever talking about you, you're like, I disagree with you, but I still love you. I know that you don't believe in prayer. I'll still pray for you. Or whatever you call it. Like, there's really not much else you can do except for be who God, love them in the way God does. Yeah. But what's interesting is that, so she's saying stuff that's from a humanist perspective, which would be the stuff about the universe and stuff like that. Sometimes I use the word universe to connect with humanists, simply because it's language that they know and they mean it for the something that's out there that I can't name. And I'm like, God, is there something out there that...
I think the term that resonates the most with me for humanism is not environmentalist, but like the whole Mother Earth.
The whole Mother Earth idea.
The whole idea of the earth and the universe.
Which is interesting because I know a lot of humanists don't really care about that. That's like almost like a mix of like a little bit of paganism with it, because paganism which most people don't. I actually have some friends who call themselves like pagans, but most people they just mix a little bit of this with a little bit of this, but they're very into the idea of like Mother Earth and calling it that. Which is also interesting though, because when you talk, which I'm still exploring, I'm not so sure about this, but if you're looking at like the cultural type of like Native Americans and first peoples in that people group, a lot of their language, it's not paganism, but it does, the earth is very much part of their cultural type. So like trying to explain or trying to communicate the gospel in their language is very, like, it's very interesting, because to like meet them where they're at, you're talking about, you might be using terms that they call, like they might be calling, like, we're using things like Mother Earth to be like, wow, you actually believe that the earth is God. Whereas when you're talking with somebody who is, a Native American, and that's the word that they grew up with, you're like, are they really referring to it as God, or are they referring it to as like, this is the earth, and this is just the word that I use for that. So that's where it becomes really, really
confusing.
It becomes confusing, but it becomes important for us to remember that that when we are we want to push back against stuff that doesn't seem like we have to be careful when we're pushing back, because
it may not mean the same thing.
Because it may not mean the same thing. And so we might be judging people thinking, oh, you believe this. But in reality, a lot of it is just terminology that they use that doesn't line up with our cultural terminology. And so that has become a huge problem with people like missionaries reaching Muslims, because they're like, okay, well, what do we require Muslims to do when they become Christians? Like, do we tell them not to pray in their version of like when Jews became Christians, they still prayed at the synagogue, which was Jewish, not Christian, so like, do you tell Muslims to not pray at their mosque, even though they're praying to God, but in Jesus God, not like, so there's like a huge, fight about, and this is like one of the big issues is like, when are we bringing our culture into it, and when are we helping them have just giving them the gospel and seeing how they take it into their culture, which is a very, very different thing. And it's one of the things that I find very intriguing is that study, because
it is very.
It's interesting, especially like, when I went and visited my parents, I was talking with these, there's this guy that prayed for me, I guess while I was pregnant, and he like had multiple prophecies for me. He doesn't know me at all. He just knew my parents. And he's Nigerian. And he was telling me about the church he grew up in. It was in Nigeria. Most people are Islamic, but he grew up in a very subset of Orthodox Christianity. And Orthodox Christianity is very, it's very like liturgy and rules based and very like hierarchy based. And he saw a lot of negatives with it, but he was introduced to Jesus with it. But the other thing that they really value is prophecy and dreams. And so from like the earliest age, like people are all having prophecies and dreams, and they're like actually real. So like for him, when he came to the United States, he's like, it's so weird that most of the Christians, like he's like, I saw a lot of bad things in the Orthodox Church, and he ended up leaving it. But he also was like, oh yeah, I just have prophecies and dreams all the time. And like, and so when I was pregnant, like he gave me 2 or 3 prophecies with him that like came true, and I like didn't even know them. So when I was talking with him, because they came out to meet me, I met him and his wife, and like they're talking about their family dynamic, and like she had, I think her dad was like a local tribal king, and he had like multiple wives, and then his dad had X amount of wives. And so like they're talking about like, how do they live life with a family that has like a whole bunch of wives, and you're like, well, what do they do when they become Christians? What do you do with all those extra wives? Can you like, would it be bad to divorce them because then they don't have anybody to care for them? Or like, so that becomes like one of those cultural aspects of like, what does it mean when somebody converts to Christianity when you've already made these like commitments to them? And some people are like, well, that wasn't a God covenant, so get rid of it. And then other people point to like people like David in the Old Testament who had multiple wives, and they're like, just leave it be. Like, so there's like a whole bunch of debate about like, which is why Paul brings that up a lot in the New Testament. Like, well, what do we call these like, very like Roman people with Roman worldviews and Roman beliefs? Like, what do we require them to convert to when they become Christians? And they're like, well, they can't eat meat that's like, drained of blood in a certain way. And like, there was like almost no requirements for them except for that they followed the gospel. And those requirements were just enough so that they could eat with Jewish Christians at the same table. Like those were pretty much the only requirements that they had. And then you see like the Roman household codes that are, in Ephesians and Peter and somewhere else, another place too. But those are like official, like the Roman code, like the household codes. Those were official part of like Roman belief systems, and Paul just took them and like tweaked them a little bit because it was illegal not to follow the household codes. So they were in there, but he was like, and wives, husbands also submit to your wives, which would have been like crazy for them because they're like, oh, we all know these like household codes because this is part of our cultural type. But then, so it's just this interesting dynamic of like, how do you bring the gospel into a new culture?
I want to share, okay, so I've always loved the book of Job, but to be honest, I've always just read it. Well, when I read, it didn't even make, so much of it
doesn't make sense. You're right,
so,
it doesn't.
Okay, so now the last several, like a week or so, week and a half, I've been listening to it at night when I go to bed, and honestly, when I hear Job talk about how he was talking to God,
yeah,
I'm like, how could he get away? Why wouldn't God?
Well, God did say something to him.
Yeah, why did I did?
Yeah.
I was thinking that is so. I was getting frustrated just listening to him. I'm like, I know this ends with good stuff, and and so I was looking to see how many chapters there was that I had to listen to of all the negativity and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of negativity.
Yeah, a lot, and I did not. I can't. Even my life.
Yeah, it's interesting, but I kind of appreciate it because it's just so human, and God knows us,
Yeah, but see, when you're raised like she was just saying, we think we're supposed to, and we don't realize back in those days that was probably a norm.
Well, you read the Psalms, and a lot of the Psalms are like going off against God.
Yeah, with David.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness! So when you was talking about some of these things that we just think, somebody that's been married has all these wives, like, well, sure. But they did in the Bible, and they, you know what I mean. So I'm gonna get through. I haven't gotten there yet.
You get through it.
And last night I told him, I said I'm going to bed early because I got to listen to some more Psalms. Yeah. And then I got started doing something else, and I did not feel bad that I didn't listen to any more. Not Psalms, Job. But I am gonna. But it did. It gave me a whole different outlook on Job.
Yeah.
Than what because I'm like, I feel like Job. Oh, say that. I feel like Job. I've been through a lot, but I didn't realize.
Job went through a lot.
Yeah.
And and it could be. I'm going to throw it out there. It could be a metaphor. It's under wisdom literature. It could have been just like, God was like, we need a story in here that teaches people that suffering happens, and it was like the worst form of suffering you can have, which was very important because the Jews, that was one of their worldview beliefs, is that if you suffered, it was because of sin, and so I love that Job is in there because it's like, actually, suffering is not just because of sin. You need to know this,
It's to test it. And for him, it's to test our faith.
Yeah. Well, going back to what the person in your life who she has these humanist perspectives where she believes that she's like, well, I'm enough, I'm good. But then she talks about hell. And she talks about her son being with her, which are two different. These are two different worldviews, which is also interesting because you're like, I'm not sure exactly where this one comes from, but people like this one a lot because we like to not feel like we lose somebody forever. Is he okay? Yeah, he has beads in his mouth and he's trying to breathe.
Oh.
But I know, I was like, what is that? And even hell is really interesting. I've been studying hell and heaven for the past couple of years because much of American Christianity, actually Western Christianity, not just American, but it's very influenced, because we're considered in school we have to do Western civilization. We all are the Western history comes from Greek thought processes, and then it goes to Roman thought processes, and that was really what influences the way that we think. And so a lot of which is really kind of it's kind of almost disturbing once I started studying it. A lot of our views on heaven and hell come from completely Greek worldviews, from Plato, and from Aristotle, and they're not actually like biblical, like as in the sense of like we'll read it and we're putting in these thoughts that actually like come back to Plato, and you're like, that's not actually like the idea of like bodies just like floating in heaven, like, you know, playing the harp. That's completely like not a biblical idea, but like it goes back to like the idea of Plato and Aristotle and what they believed, or like hell. The idea of hell came back to like the Greek version of Hades. And like there is a word that is for like Sheol or Hades, but it has a different meaning in Greek, which is like the underworld where and so like much of our view about Satan and Hades is actually a Greek philosophy, and it's not actually like, if you read it and remove that Greek philosophy, you're like, oh, this actually says something different than like what American culture says it is. So it is kind of interesting, like when you start looking at how culture affects the way our culture affects the way that we read scriptures, and in addition, like how we mix multiple different like cultural worldviews together and we see these different things, then it's kind of like, what is God really saying? What is the gospel really saying? And ultimately, the gospel really says what? What does the good news really say? Like, if you made it into its like tiniest pieces, what would it be?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. What do you think it is, Val?
What is the gospel?
Yeah, what is the gospel? What is the good news? What is it that Paul preached throughout Europe on his
That
mission?
God made a way for us to be in relationship with him.
Yeah, that there's God, a creator.
And he wants relationship.
He wants relationship. And he removes sin through belief in Jesus. And because of that, we have resurrection, which actually means like a real, like our bodies are new. Resurrection. So a lot of the other things, like there's a lot of other things in the Bible, but ultimately, like, you have to remember that almost no early Christians ever had a Bible. Like, they didn't, well, first of all, they didn't have a Bible for many, many hundreds of years. But, like, even scripture, like, the Jews might have memorized the Torah, but most people didn't have the Torah. Like, really, often the only thing that was being passed to one person to another was this bare basic, this was it. And here we, like, not saying that we complicate it through the Bible, because the Bible is necessary to know God more, and it's a gift to us. But so often we get so caught up in the other things and like trying to focus on these other things and make them like, when really ultimately this is like everything we need to read is in this context, because this is what Jesus released into the world, and this was enough. Like, if Jesus believed that this was enough, then I think that we gotta like go back and focus on this, and like everything that we read is through the context of like, I don't really know, like, who was Paul talking to? What was that culture? Like, what was the culture that he was coming from? But ultimately, it always comes back to, like, God is a creator. He, like, how he created. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people disagreed on that, even in those time periods. You know, like, the Jews have their story of creation, but that wasn't passed on to everybody. You know, like, Romans already had a creation story. Greeks are, and you like to think that some of them got passed on, but you don't really know. But like, ultimately, like what you see in Paul's letter is like, God, he's a creator. He's the unknown God, but he's real, and he gives us relationship, and he removes that sin. He fills that enoughness for us, and that comes through belief and grace in Jesus. And I find that like so important, especially when we're interacting with people of all these different worldviews, because this is ultimately what we're trying to bring it back to.
Yeah.
So I know it's time to be done. I would like to know. Oh, I gave you these charts. They're like really basic.
I don't think you gave them to us.
Did I give them to you last? Did I give them to you last week?
No.
I didn't. I thought I gave them to you last week.
I can make copies if you need.
No, I'm sure I have them in here.
Okay, can you tell me again, because I wrote those down. God is the creator. We can have a relationship with God. He removes our sins.
Yeah.
And then
Belief, and it's through the belief in Jesus. And that brings us to resurrection. All right. 1, 2, and then I have the other chart too. this one goes over it through a worldview perspective, which is a little bit, I don't know, I don't think you would want to read it in depth, but it's kind of interesting because it talks about it like, okay, well, this thought process, like, like we would be, like a lot of the United States would be secular humanism right here. And so these are just some things that we kind of like move into. This is like a worldview chart, which talks a lot. Worldview isn't exactly a religion, but a lot of them are the same. Like, so you'll start seeing how people embrace one of these worldviews. It tends to be embraced like cosmic humanism. That would be very much like Mother Earth. It kind of goes into like Eastern religions. Humanism is what is in the United States. So these are different worldview types. These are specific religions, like the main world religions. I don't know. I would probably put tribal religions on here too, but I like this. It was from a 6th grade class. I like stole it from them. So these are just kind of like simple like things to reference. And when it comes to worldviews, I think, or these type of things, we don't have time to go into any of these like really, really deeply, but I think it would be helpful for us to go into Islam a little bit more, which is largely because we have a lot of our new neighbors in San Diego come from Islamic beliefs, and that seems kind of relevant to us, especially because we have opportunities to work with refugees, which maybe I'll tell you about next time. But they usually have an Islamic worldview, and I think that could be helpful for us. But if you have any other questions for the next time, this was like a whole a lot of information. It's not information I expect you to remember. It's just
You don't have to worry about that.
yeah, you're like, I won't. It just kind of gives you like a background, so that way when you're like thinking, when you're talking with different people and you're hearing their stories, for you to kind of be like, what angle are they coming at it from? What things are they saying? Because then when you can notice that, it becomes a lot easier to kind of connect with them and remember what you believe. So one thing I am going to ask of you for homework is I want us to practice telling our stories. And by telling our stories, I mean like our testimony, or just, how we came to follow God, or how he's done different things in our life. And this is an incredibly powerful tool. And I know that you guys have probably practiced it before, but it's a safe place to practice it. And also it helps us to get to know each other more. So over the next few weeks, I'm going to see if either of you guys would be willing to share your story. And I can give you a worksheet if that's more helpful for you, that helps you like know how to say it, because some people have struggled with that.
Well,
So
I'd like to have it whether I use it for this.
Yeah,
or
okay.
Just to have it as
I will send it to you.
Because I do plan on, that's really what the Lord's dealing with.
Yeah, well, I want you to be able to practice it.
Because I told you last week, or I think it was, where I used to think that I'm supposed to just tell people things that would encourage them based on what they're going through.
Yeah, but
Most of the time, I don't know exactly what they're going through when I get an opportunity, so it's just, I just need to share my testimony.
Your testimony,
and
yeah.
So
So that is, I will give you tools, but if you guys want to, do any of you guys want to do it next week, or even though I don't have too much to do? Okay. What about you? Do you
I'll
want
work
to?
on it. I mean, I don't know. I'll come up.
I mean, I can send you something.
Sure.
I don't know if you need it, but you can.
What about the metaphor homework? You were going to share your metaphor or
I
something.
forgot about that entirely. Did you think of one?
I thought of one, but I didn't know if it was an exact metaphor.
Okay. Well, what is it?
explain the metaphor.
It's like describing something, maybe something realistic